how an 18th century weather diary shed light on the effects of Icelandic volcanic eruption on Scotland. This is by Alistair Dawson, Professor of Geography, Environmental Science, University of Dundee in the UK, on the conversation. On June 15, 1783, Dr. John Purcell went outside his house in Edinburgh, Scotland, looked up at the clouds and wrote in his diary how dark and gloomy the sky was. The dark skies, he reported, continued for several days, followed by 2 or 3 days of fine weather. Then, on June 25th, he began to describe the presence of a choking sulphurous haze that lingered over Edinburgh for the rest of the summer. This was June 15th, 1783. Across Scotland, others were describing similar patterns of weather. At Gordon Castle in Morayshire, similar descriptions appeared in an estate diary. In Aberdeenshire, Janet Burnett was recording in her farming diary how the leaves of her crops were withering and turning yellow, while on the estate of Henry, 3rd Duke of Buccleuch, near Edinburgh, daily weather conditions were being measured with a thermometer, barometer, and rain gauge. What these people didn't know was that on June 8th, there had been a huge volcanic eruption at Laki in Iceland. Kindly support my Patreon account since YouTube has again demonetized my YouTube channel. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below. So they didn't know there was a few days before a huge volcanic eruption in Iceland. As the world learned later, it was probably one of the largest outpourings of lava in the past 1,000 years, spewing out 42 billion tons of molten rock. It not only released large volumes of volcanic ash into the atmosphere, but also enormous amounts of sulfur dioxide aerosols, over 120 megatons, according to some estimates. For comparisons, the eruptions of 1783 were 10 times the size of Iceland's 2010 volcanic eruption at Eyjafjallajökull. And we know that ash spread all of Europe, and it stopped at the borders of Greece, and it created havoc with air transport, of course. So that volcanic eruption in 2010 resulted in an aviation shutdown across Europe, as we know. News, though, did not reach Scotland for several weeks. We're talking about the 1783 eruption, when the first brief account was published in the July issue of the Scots magazine. Later, 1783 came to be known as Gaelic as Blaidni nan Snechta Bude, or the Year of the Yellow Snow. Famines recorded as far away as Egypt and even Japan have been attributed to Laki, while it was even claimed that crop failures in Europe contributed to the outbreak of the French Revolution. By the middle of July, the choking haze had enveloped most of Europe. Throughout the summer, reports were widespread from many countries of thousands of people dying from respiratory illnesses. What was always puzzling was there was virtually no information known for Scotland during this time, and until now, apart from the Scots magazine report a month after that eruption, the only published report was a brief reference from nearly a century ago of volcanic ash having fallen across parts of Caithness in 1783. In our research, we unearthed several undiscovered diaries and daily weather records for Scotland to reconstruct the patterns of weather and climate change that took place both before, during, and after the eruption of the Laki volcano. The impact on the weather. The Laki eruption threw columns of smoke and ash between 9 and 13 kilometers into the atmosphere, with individual eruptions of flood lava taking place along a very large fissure in the Earth's crust and continuing for almost 9 months. The sulfur that was released into the Earth's atmosphere reacting with moisture in the air to produce sulfate aerosols, these gas compounds were then transported by prevailing winds across northern and southern Europe. In effect, a very dilute form of sulfuric acid was circulating across the lower part of the Earth's atmosphere during the summer of 1783 and it proved very difficult to shift. Climate scientists have long known that major volcanic eruptions often emit enormous volumes of volcanic ash into the atmosphere and have the effect of blocking the sun's radiation and cooling the Earth's climate. The eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia during April 1815 is a famous example, often referred to as the year without the summer. From the perspective of past climate in Scotland, scientists have long debated whether the succession of cold winters that followed were a direct result of the Laki volcanic eruptions. Certainly the snowy winters of 1783 and 84 and 1784 and 85 were two of the coldest Scottish winters of recent centuries. Historians have speculated that the severity of these two cold winters and the crop failures and livestock losses that accompanied them only helped accelerate the pace of immigration to North America at that time. The choking haze. Our analysis of these rare weather records from Scotland for this period paints a slightly different picture in the sense that we cannot demonstrate, as many have argued in the past, that the Laki eruptions by themselves caused immediate climate cooling across Europe. Instead, our study suggests that the exceptionally cold winters were more likely to be the result of natural climatic variability. The most important consequence of the Laki eruption was by far the choking sulfuric acid in the atmosphere and the respiratory hazard that this presented. And thanks to the diaries, we now know that the haze blanketed eastern and northern Scotland during the summer and autumn of 1783, and certainly affected an area stretching from Inverness in the north to Edinburgh in the south. Most likely the haze was even more widespread. No study of Scottish mortality has ever been conducted in respects of deaths caused by the sulfuric haze. Although Laki is now dormant, the eruptions of Asia Kojul in 2010 and Holuram in 2014, and now news at Mount Killier, just a few miles south of Reykjavik, is erupting, demonstrates just how much volcanic eruption is an ever-present threat in Iceland. We know that it's a magma plume there, a mantle plume there. Now, where other eruptions of Laki's magnitude to occur, Scotland and other countries of the British Isles could face serious respiratory crisis. We've shown that the weather conditions in the summer of 1783 represented almost a worst-case scenario of sustained high atmospheric pressure and the presence of an air mass capable of bringing the poisonous aerosols into contact with the Scottish population. This raises the question of how to address a poorly known natural hazard that takes place relatively infrequently, but which poses a potentially serious environmental threat. Clearly, this risk needs to be considered very carefully in health and safety planning. Thanks to Laki, the summer of 1783 can remind us of the significant impact that major volcanic eruptions can have on weather, climate, and public health. This was on The Conversation, Creative Commons. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support.